I'm going to be talking about the open web and the broken TVs. Who's this guy? I'm Rick, and in January I started a web development agency for front-end development called Lomalog. And one of my main clients over the last year or so has been a company called PickLive, which you can't really see right now, but you can. So PickLive is a real-time fantasy football game. So you only play the games when there's a live football match televised on your TV. So the players on the screen respond to real players in a real match. And the user would pick 3 players from either team, and you would get points based on what they do in the real match. So for instance, if Messi gets a pass, he would get 1 point, and if he scores a goal, he would get 20 points. In fact, some of our users don't even play whilst they're watching the TV. They play along for fun, they don't have Sky, they just do it for the entertainment, and the game works in most modern browsers, and including the iPad. And PickLive is one of a growing trend called the two-screen experience. So there is, you watch the TV and you play along with real-time on the web. So for instance, sports and TV shows and mass media events would be part of this. People watch a lot more TV than they do 5 years ago, and a lot more people use the internet with the TV. Real-time streams such as Twitter, Facebook and forums. Example shows would be The X Factor, The Apprentice, I'm a Celebrity, Question Time. And it doesn't need to be real-time shows as well. Things like EastEnders and Coronation Street would be perfect for this. So using my experience of developing PickLive, I'm going to talk about the ups and downs of developing web development games. So first of all, we've got some bad news. I'm going to start with a quote from Carl Pilkington. Have I told you about my Uncle Al? He had 2 tellies. He had one that the sound didn't work on and one that the picture didn't, but both together it worked. So as long as he was watching the same channel on both, the sound came out of one telly and he'd watch the picture in the other, and he slept in a rubber dinghy. So why have I picked this quote? Well, for me, it sounds like web development today is a bit like a collection of broken TVs. So on the left we have our open web technologies such as HTML, CSS and JavaScript. And on the right we have Flash, ActiveX and polyfills. So polyfills are scripts that we use to make older browsers work with newer technologies. And together we have what we have today as open web technologies. For instance, audio and video are still very heavily reliant on Flash. For instance, try telling the client that they need to upload various different formats of videos because of licensing issues, they won't be too happy. So does that mean that Flash is the saviour of the open web, since we have to use all the functionality that we want from our websites? Well, we have to admit that Flash will always be better at some things just by its very nature. For instance, it's plugin based, so it isn't dependent on browser releases. It's also cross-browser and cross-platform, so we have no problems with compatibility. Also, its direction is only decided by one company, Adobe. So why should we use Flash to make games instead? For instance, ActionScript, Flash's scripting language, is a prototypal, functional programming language, perfect for event-based interactions. ActionScript is a dialect of ECMAScript, just like JavaScript. So now we have some good news. The difference between ActionScript and Flash is getting smaller and smaller. This is in thanks to browser vendors, even Microsoft, pushing further and further. Browsers update with a faster pace now, and there's quicker deprecation between older browsers. For instance, Chrome updates every 6 weeks now. We can also do things like push notifications that we could never do in the past, using WebSockets and 3D graphics with WebGL. So eventually, we'll get our TVs being a bigger portion being open web technologies, and a smaller percent being Flash and ActiveX and polyfills. And to me, HTML5 movement is a lot more exciting than the Web 2.0 movement in the past, because there's a lot more technology changes and a lot more fun things for developers to use. As Christian said, there's all client-side code is free to read. You saw some Firebug. Let's front-end developers see how other front-end developers do things. Pulling things apart is a lot more fun than just reading the manual. And so, as Christian said, I wouldn't minify your code unless you really need to, because it stops other people learning from what you do. Because we all know that coding isn't that easy, especially browser-based coding. We not only have to test out code in different browsers, but different versions of browsers, we also have different versions of browsers on different operating systems. And making games isn't exactly an easy thing. It requires a different mindset than making normal web development. There's a lot more events and interactions that you need to think about. So being able to view source and using things like Firebug and web development tools, it makes not only my life easier, but your life easier, and also like the future generations of web developers' lives easier. And JavaScript is no longer the uncool language. It's now mainstream and popular. 18% of all projects on GitHub have a main component of JavaScript. This is in part due to things like JavaScript libraries, such as jQuery. It gets designers and front-end developers using CSS selectors as functions, and also part to do with server-side JavaScript, such as Node.js. It helps friends from a code sharing point of view and the context switching, so no longer developers need to learn two different languages for both ends of their websites. And obviously there's a big price. This is the price for Adobe Flash at the moment. The big advantage for the open web is that anyone can do it, and for free. It doesn't matter who you are, how much bandwidth you are, or how much money you have either. You can just code in any text browser, and test in any browser too. But what about native applications? Well, we'd have to admit that native applications are always going to be more powerful because they're native. And they get a bit more promotion as well, thanks to things like the Apple Store. But this might stop happening due to things like the Mozilla and Chrome app stores coming out soon. Obviously development means separate code bases as well, because you get one for Apple, one for Android, one for Windows, which means more code bases and more developers having to spend more time doing things. And also you get, in some stores, non-instant deployment, which means, for instance, one Apple Store approval took 429 days to approve, which is a big problem for critical updates. This is a conversation I had with my flatmate when I was talking about PicLive. When I told him that you can have a game that not only works in browsers, but it works in iPads and mobiles, and isn't in Flash and isn't a native application, he was really surprised. Because Thomas doesn't really care how I build games. Thomas doesn't really care about WebSockets or WebGL or CSS transitions. But if I did tell him that, you know that game you play on Internet Explorer at work, you can play that on your phone in the pub, and then on your iPad when you're hungover the next day. And this is a great reason to build open web applications. We shouldn't just be building open web games, but games that happen to use the open web. So I'm going to make some predictions that there's no reason why an open web game couldn't become as popular as these games in the future. And I'm going to predict that an open web game will get really big in the next year, and it'll really make someone a lot of money. And I really hope that it'll be one of you guys in this room. So thank you. Has anyone got any questions? Yep.
You mentioned the cost of Flash, but I severely doubt that anyone who submits stuff on Newgrounds ever really uses it at full cost. But let's face it, is one of the most popular web game sites on the web at the moment. What do you see as being the incentive to move away from Flash-based towards HTML5?
I think it's just a developer thing. Like developers like things they can play with, like Christine was saying before. They like sites that they can hack around with, and things like ViewSource and Firebug are great for playing around with things like that. I just find that using things like closed source doesn't make much sense because it's not as fun for us developers to use. Developers like open source things because they can hack around.
Equally, people can hack around if they've got a hacked version of Flash, which, I mean, as I highlighted, Newgrounds is a particular source of all kinds of Flash-based gaming.
But should you need to hack around with Flash to do that kind of thing? You can just use the open web and just use it that way instead.
endorsing pirated versions of software.
How dare you? No way am I endorsing. I'm merely stating that there is many popular sources to obtain such games which are no doubt pirated.
Yeah, but it's quite fun that, for example, Photoshop keeps your name and your license key in almost every JPEG. So how many people don't realize that their stolen stuff, building software on top of, is very easy to trace back? Is another thing that might be interesting in the next few years.
That's not to say I'm a pirate version of Photoshop.
And the open web doesn't need a license key as well. Thanks.
There's a question down
Oh, yeah, go on.
down there.
What? Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
It's obviously very easy to say that from a developer point of view,
Yeah.
there's a motivation to move to open tools because developers like to play.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're not the only person here tonight, but I've noticed a big focus on developers. What would motivate the game designer to move away from Flash if they could express their game in Flash more easily?
The fact that you can use this multi-platform that a lot of people are trying for right now, there's a lot of different companies going for HTML5 and the open web route, that you can build your games on the open web and you can...
Any question that
Yeah, okay.
But I can express myself already in Flash. Why am I expressing myself in HTML5 instead of Flash? I think that was almost the core of the question over there.
You can play it on your iPad.
Yeah, I can't see your stuff on my iPad.
I'm not getting
I want your stuff though.
As a designer, why do you care? You design the thing, what developer builds it for every platform, and if he builds it on 10 platforms, you're happier.
But it's true that Flash can be a faster prototyping tool. You can, it's a more established toolkit, right?
Yeah, but you
So
can
I think there's going to be better tools for HTML5. I think that's going to be the answer.
But what we really need as well is a tool from Flash to open formats.
I think Adobe might be working on that.
Yeah, and they do, yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah. Yep.
I'm just curious, where do you get the data from to say who kicked the ball? Is someone sitting there saying, "Oh, he kicked it"?
Yeah, we've got... am I allowed to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We have 5 people watching the match each time. There's 2 for each team and an umpire. So two people will be watching the match, 2 for each team. And one person will be watching the match, calling out events, and the other person will be typing them in. Yep.
Are you open sourcing your server-side code?
We're not yet. We're using Rails, so we're not using Node.js or anything like that. Just some technical background on it. We're using Rails and XMPP client, so we're using a JavaScript library called Strophe that connects with an XMPP client and some Flash, actually. But it falls back as well. So. Okay, thank you.